So one of my friends from the internet named Sam, he was raised in a what he calls a biblical Unitarian church. It's a charismatic church that sort of came out of the Jesus movement, and his father became a Christian in that, so he was raised in it. And he and I met over YouTube, and he has his own channel where sometimes he picks up some of these themes that he has, and he often talks to Jews and to Muslims because they resist the Christian Trinitarianism. And so he spoke with this rather high-profile online rabbi the other day, and it was interesting listening to them talk, and as this is often the case with many of my Jewish friends. In fact, just Friday, my friend Jacob, who has visited the church and he's such an interesting guy, Friday he had a live stream, and he was, again, talking about how I often get back to this point, that so often the difference between, let's say, Islamic or Jewish and Christian themes is this question about Messiah. Because as I listen to my friends, so often, Jacob, of course, when I first started this, he told me, "You're not near messianic enough." And I said, "Well, what do you mean, Jacob?" And he was leaning into, you should be more political, and you should be looking to build a big following, and you should be more directive with people about things. And I said, you have to understand the shape of my Messiah. And so Jacob and I have known each other like 5 or 6, 7 years, and every time we come around to this topic, we sort of butt heads because he's like, "No, this is Messiah." And I keep saying, "No, I don't think so." Jesus reshaped what everyone expected Messiah and King to look like. Last week, Jesus takes the sin of Zacchaeus upon himself to rescue the most hated man in town. And we see in Jericho a foretaste of what is coming when Jesus gets to Jerusalem. Jesus has told his disciples 3 times exactly what will happen. Now, I don't know about you, but I know many Christians often pray, "Lord, just tell me what to do or show me what's coming." And here Jesus tells them exactly what to do and shows them exactly what's coming. And they're like, no, that's not what I'm looking for. Which is so often the case with us. Jesus will go to Jerusalem. Jesus will be handed over to the Romans and executed. And on the 3rd day, he'll rise from the dead. And no one believes him because they can't. Luke has been careful to relate this tension in Jesus' work all throughout his gospel. By virtue of the miracles, there's an enthusiasm and an expectation that Jesus has power. And when this divine power flows through Jesus, this son of Israel, then Jesus will make Israel great again, and they'll throw off the Roman tyranny, and they'll get the wobbly Jews and Israelites in line, and maybe from there the armies will go out from Jerusalem and they'll conquer Antioch, and they'll conquer Alexandria, and they'll conquer Greece, and they'll conquer Rome. And sort of like Alexander the Great, they'll just keep conquering. And so the miracles, Jesus goes into Jericho and performs a miracle on a blind man, and everyone's excited. But Jesus certainly knows the script. Alexander the Great followed it. Caesar followed it. And at the time of Jesus' ministry, the most popular religion in the empire was setting up shrines to the divinized Caesar Augustus. That was the big religion. Let's go to the temple and welcome the Son of God, the god Julius Caesar, his son Octavius, the divine Caesar Augustus. All over the Roman empires, new temples were built at this time for the Son of God, Caesar Augustus. Jesus knows this. Everyone knows this. So then why does he keep making these offensive, problematic political missteps, like snubbing the hierarchy in Jericho and eating with the sinner Zacchaeus. Now, I follow this narrative lectionary that comes out of Luther Seminary. I like it because, unlike the Revised Common Lectionary that tends to go between the books, I like it when we stay in one book of the Bible, because that way we can learn that book of the Bible with all the particular themes and accents. Early on, when these 4 books arose, people thought we should just put all these books together. But the church in its wisdom decided, no, we have 4 witnesses of Jesus, and each of these books brings out a different aspect of who Jesus is. But with this lectionary, I noticed they jumped right from Zacchaeus to Palm Sunday. And I thought, no, because right after, the Zacchaeus story isn't done with Zacchaeus' speech and Jesus' response. Jesus has more to say at the party in Zacchaeus' house. While they were listening to Zacchaeus promise to give away his fortune to the people that he's robbed and cheated, and Jesus saying, see, Zacchaeus is a child of Abraham, finishing the parable of the prodigal son, Jesus went on to tell a parable. Because he was near Jerusalem, and the people thought the kingdom of God was going to appear at once. So Jesus knows exactly what is on everybody's mind. And here's the funny thing about our minds and the future. Perhaps if you got married, before you were married, you had an image of what married life would be like. And I ask you, did it turn out like you thought? Maybe better, maybe worse. Or maybe when you graduated high school and you thought, once I have a car, once I have a job, once I have all this money, then life will be a certain way. Did it turn out that way? Human imaginations, they feel full, but they're really very limited. We don't know what comes in the future. The future is so particular and strange. And so Jesus knows, everyone imagines when Jesus comes into Jerusalem, then, and if you were to pause them and say, then what? I don't know. Maybe the Romans will flee. Maybe the angels will descend. Maybe there'll be sparks of lightning. Maybe Jesus will sit on a throne, and he'll have Peter, James, and John, and he'll send them out as lieutenants, conquering Alexandria and Antioch and Ephesus and Corinth, and then finally Rome, and then maybe even up to Gaul after that. And Jesus knows they're thinking it, so he says, before any of this kicks off, let me tell you a parable. Because I think Jesus is already anticipating when what actually happens, which is exactly what I've told you will happen, you're going to be really tempted to throw everything away. He said, a man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king and then to return. And he called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 minas. Minas is about 3 months' rent, or 3 months' wages. So he called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 and said, put this money to work. And he said, until I come back. So Jesus is saying, something is going to happen. I'm going to go away, but I want you to be faithful. But his subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him saying, we don't want this man to be our king. Can you see how this lines up with Palm Sunday already? Luke knew what he was doing because it's going to start with all glory, laud, and honor, and it's going to end with crucify him, crucify him. He was made king, however, and returned home. Then he sent for the servants to whom he had given the money in order to find out what they had gained with it. The first one came and said, "Sir, your mina has earned 10 more. "Well done, good servant," his master replied. "Because you have been trustworthy in a very small matter, take charge of 10 cities. And you can imagine when Jesus is giving this parable, people are thinking, "Oh, I'm going to be on Team Jesus when we get to Jerusalem. Because when we get to Jerusalem and he overthrows the Romans and he sits in that throne and he sends out his armies, I want to be right up at the top. So I'll be a ruler. What part of the world do I want to rule? Egypt or Syria or Asia Minor or Greece?" Because that's how the Romans do it, right? If you're buddies with Caesar, you get the plum positions. Every kingdom works that way. The second one came and said, "Sir, your mina has earned 5 more. And his master answered, "You take 5 cities. Then another came and said, "Sir, here is your mina. I've kept it laid away in a piece of cloth. I was afraid of you, because you are a hard man. You take out what you do not put in, and you reap what you do not sow." His master replied, "I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. You knew, did you, that I am a hard man, taking out what I did not put in, and reaping what I did not sow? Why then didn't you put my money on deposit, so that when I came back, I could have collected it with interest? You could have at least done that." Then he said to those standing by, "Take his mina away from him, and give it to the one who has 10. "The one who has 10? "Sir," they said, "he already has 10. And he replied, "I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given. But as for the one who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. But those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me." This is Jesus' parable. Remember how last week I said, don't think Jesus is just nicey-nicey. Jesus is more demanding than we think reasonable, and more merciful than we think responsible. Sometimes when we read Jesus and he is doing things like eating with sinners, like he's doing right here at the banquet where he spoke this, people think, Jesus is letting these people get away with things. Oh. And then he says something like this, and people are like, oh, well, Jesus is more demanding than we think responsible or reasonable. And Jesus is both. And that's why we never stop thinking about him. That's why we can't resolve the puzzle of him. So this is what Jesus says in Jericho to this group at Zacchaeus' house. Remember, Zacchaeus just gave this grand speech about how much he's going to give away. And when Jesus says this, Zacchaeus is probably thinking in the back of his mind, I better follow through. Now, Jesus says this before Palm Sunday to encourage his followers. Now, watch this little video clip. It's going to play a few times so you can take your eyes off it in a minute. But right there, look at what he does to the defense. Now, this is the kind of wide receiver that Reggie wants to draft every year. Because look at that move. Everybody thinks he's going to go one way, and he goes another way, and he like fools 6, 7, 8 defenders and takes the ball right in the goal. And that move that he does right there, that's called a juke. Because everyone is imagining he's running, and just even pre-consciously, the defenders are anticipating he started to move this way, and so everybody starts to move that way. He moves this way a little bit, and he cuts the other way, and he keeps doing that, and look, up, and then they can't catch him. And the reason I played this is because Jesus does this all the time with people. Everybody thinks Jesus is going this way. Oh, now he's over there. In Jericho, he juked. Oh, Jesus is coming. The town fathers will have a wonderful banquet, and Jesus will say all the right things. Jesus says, I'm just passing through. The town fathers, I'm sure we're going to lure him. And then Jesus stops by Zacchaeus and says, that's the house I'm going to. What? And then he's all with Zacchaeus, and everyone's thinking, he eats with sinners. And Jesus says, do you have any understanding how demanding I am? After Jesus said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying, go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you'll find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. And of course, everybody listening to this is like, go down Florin Road, and you'll find a brand new car and a guy out there polishing it. And go up to the guy polishing his car and say, can you give me the keys? And the guy looks at you and you say, the master has need of it. And he'll hand over the keys. And you would say, oh, that's not going to happen. But it does. If anyone asks you, why are you untying it? Say, the Lord needs it. Those who were sent ahead found it just as he had told them. And as they were untying the goat, the colt, the owner asked him, why are you untying my colt? They replied, the Lord needs it. Why do you need a colt that can't be ridden? Because it's still wild. We haven't broken it yet. Can Jesus sit on a wild animal and ride it calmly amidst a yelling crowd? I mean, talk to Edie. Edie grew up in Montana with horses and those kinds of things. She'll tell you about these animals. You've got to train an animal. But for Jesus, not a problem. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. And so Palm Sunday is full of miracles. David rode donkeys, not horses. You can find that in the book of Samuel. You can find the prophecy about this in Zechariah 9:9. You have the mysterious release of, these aren't the drones you're looking for. Here, take the colt. Okay. And Jesus sits on an unbroken animal in the midst of a crowd and rides it right into town. And everybody is going crazy. Finally, after years of subjugation by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, now Jesus is going to free us from the Romans. And again, if you were to sit down and ask them, what exactly do you think is going to happen here? They'd be like, well, I don't know, but it'll be great. When he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in a loud voice for all, again, remember, all the miracles that they had seen. This is the miracle man. He's got the divine power. He's going to make good on the promises of God for Israel. Finally, our day in the sun will come. Blessed be the King who comes in the name of the Lord. From Psalm 118, the Psalm of Ascent. The King is finally, Jerusalem is his royal city. The temple is on the mountain. Jesus is coming down. He's going to go up into the mountain. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. And now, you only find that line in Luke. But if you remember, Luke 2, when Jesus is born in Bethlehem, the angels come and sing, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests. And now the crowd on earth is responding to the crowd in heaven, and this is kingdom come. And everybody is just so excited that it's finally happening. This is straight Jesus. Jesus, the King of Israel. But there's a little juke. And that Jesus isn't exactly what they're expecting him to be. Because again, what exactly, if you were asked them to write down, maybe they're all little school children, you put them behind desks and you say, okay, we're at this moment where Jesus is coming into Jerusalem, Palm Sunday, we're waving the palm branches, the cloaks on the ground, riding the donkey, all of these things. What happens next? Gathering a crowd, intimidate the soldiers, distribute weapons, start to kill or intimidate the opposition, have the Romans flee, seize power. Well, what exactly is power? Well, that means have all of your people in the special places, where all the other people who, like the Romans, those are driven from the special places. Whenever we have like a transition of government in the United States, what happens? Well, those who are voted in take the seats in the White House or in the governor's mansion or in the Congress. It's all about position and place and authority and ordering. That's power. Sit in a fancy chair, people do what you say. All right. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." The Pharisees are paying attention. Now, again, as we talked before, different factions in the Israelite first century culture war have different strategies. The Essenes, they're all living in their bunkers in the desert. The Zealots, they're waiting for Zacchaeus to come out in the open so they can stick a shiv in him. The Pharisees are playing a much longer culture war game. They're like, make sure Israel obeys God. So no healing on the Sabbath. Keep that gleaning to a minimum. Make sure you follow the dietary laws and the sanitary laws. Keep the covenant, because if you keep the covenant real tight, then God will reward you. And so the Pharisees have always sort of been closest to Jesus in some ways. But when they see this happening in Jerusalem, they're like, this is over the top, Jesus. You know, when you're accepting all of this, what you're claiming to be. You know this, Jesus. And this is why, again and again, people say to me things like, I don't really think Jesus claimed to be God. And I'm like, that certainly seems to be what the people around him are angry about. The Pharisees listen to this and say, this is way out of line. You're claiming too much. And then Jesus doubles down. Jesus says, I tell you, he replied, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. Well, what does that mean? Jesus, who is demonstrating complete mastery over nature by riding an unbroken animal through a crowd yelling and screaming and going crazy, basically says, I am the master creator of this world. I can make stones talk. We've seen the blind see. We've seen the storm ceased. We've seen the dead raised. He's riding an unbroken animal. Jesus is claiming complete mastery, not simply over this enthusiastic crowd of people. Oh, you can get a crowd, you can get a mob to say things and do things. We see that all the time. But that mob will prove unreliable and fickle. But the natural order? That's what we literally set our clocks and calendars to. And Jesus says, I am master of that. He is claiming to have authority over nature herself. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, and again, it's so strange, he wept over it. Everyone is imagining this is Jesus' big moment. This is when it's finally happening. And here is Jesus weeping. And said, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. The crowd was just singing peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes, just like his disciples' ability to know he's going to rise on Easter. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. No, wait a minute. This is supposed to be Jesus' reign, and we're going to be winning the wars. And Jesus is saying, no, actually, the Romans are going to come here. And you're going to pick a fight with them, and you're going to lose that fight badly. They will dash you to the ground, you and your children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another. Those stones that were going to cry out in praise of me, those stones are going to be witnesses to this prophecy. Because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. Jesus is noting that the course his nation is on will be suicide by legion. And it is coming. The counterfactual is difficult, again, for us in our imaginative narrative. Because, well, what would it have been for them to bring peace? What would they have needed to do if they obeyed Jesus, if they believed Jesus, if they worshiped Jesus? Well, they're doing it in the moment. But again, remember the parable of the mina. Jesus is like, things are going to happen. And I'm looking for faithfulness over the long term. How would this have played out with respect to Rome? Pilate going home, Jesus sitting upon a throne. It's sort of like asking, what if Eve had never taken the fruit? Now we sort of, puzzle over that and think about it. But again, our imaginations are so small and reality is so huge. But Jesus is very clearly aware that he's letting them celebrate his kingship today, but he knows full well, because he's told it to them 3 times, how this is going to go. And the reason is, in another passage, Jesus notes, he doesn't trust us. Why doesn't Jesus trust us? I hate to break the news to you, but he's been watching. He knows how we are. We are untrustworthy. So Jesus comes and says, I am your king. I want to be your king. I want to be king of your life. I want to be king of your heart. But you're not ready to be my servants. Israel and Zacchaeus are not far from each other, but they're both very far from God. And Jesus comes to rescue Zacchaeus from his own town and to restore his relationship with God, to once again restore him as a son of Abraham. And we are on a course of self-destruction that we are unable to swerve from. That's always the way it is. We imagine, well, America's great. And it's like, well, the British Empire was great. The French Empire was great. Empires of this world rise and fall. That is the story of this world. The level of renovation needed to save this world at every fractal level is beyond some behavioral or political tweaks. We see little salvations here and there. Zacchaeus, there was a great little salvation. But everybody saw Zacchaeus, but they weren't paying attention to what that cost Jesus. And so Jesus is basically saying, I showed you on a tiny little scale with Jericho and Zacchaeus. Now I'm going to show you on a huge scale in Jerusalem with me and the world. What will it take to actually change the world and save it for good? Regime change? Armies? Every year in the world, regimes rise and fall. Cities are taken or kept. At every level, the strife of humanity goes and goes and goes, and there is no peace. Jesus reserved the strangest juke of all, which will be Good Friday. Instead of just rescuing Zacchaeus from the village, he'll rescue the story of the world from us and for us. And it doesn't just appear at once because, it's just going to come. And I was listening to a podcast of a couple of people I know from the internet, and they were talking about sin, and they were asking about basically, okay, what do we mean by this salvation? Does it come at once? In some ways, yes. Sometimes someone has a miraculous turning in their life, and they can say, this day I was this way, and that day I started to change. But once we become a Christian, we very quickly begin to realize that actually it's taking a while for Jesus to move into all of the parts of my heart and all of the parts of my life. Not only is there resistance to Jesus in the world, there's resistance to Jesus in me. And I've signed on. We're going to see that in Peter, in Judas. Resistance to Jesus is at every level, and Jesus says, I know. I have to do this. And I'm going to do it for you. Like Jesus' glory, it sneaks in and grabs us unexpectedly. But it yields a harvest of gratitude. Not simply compliance or instrumentalism for what we think we want. Be like, wouldn't it be great if Jesus sat on a throne? Well, you could put up a throne and sit Jesus in it, but all of the people are still how they are. We need to be rewired from head to toe. Palm Sunday is a strange Sunday in which Jesus is declared as king before he is killed. And what does Pilate put on the cross above him to the protestation of the people? In 3 languages. King of the Jews. King of God's chosen people. What is really revealed is that we don't know what we want or need. And again, just do the exercise when you were a teenager and you sat down, and if your teacher said, write a story of your life, you wrote all of these things. I'm going to go here. I'm going to do that. I'm going to marry this way. I'm going to do this job. I'm going to get these things. It's kind of a fun exercise for a little kid. But if we look back on them, we'd laugh. Life isn't anything like I thought it was going to be. That's a lot. It's very telling about us. But fortunately, we have a Father in heaven who loves us and knows better than we do. Zacchaeus is to follow through responding to his deliverance. He will bear witness to justice in a costly way. But the parable of the Minas is a parable encouraging the followers of the triumphant Jesus to be faithful until his return. Faithfulness is hard. Why? Because it's faithfulness through time. The crowd is inspired. They're inspired by the miracles. They're inspired by the palms. They're inspired by winning. Winning's fun. You know what's hard? Faithfulness is hard. Because it's every day you wake up and faithful today, faithful tomorrow. How can I be faithful? That's where we are. What does faithfulness in waiting for the return of the King look like? Well, it looks like doing what the King has told us to do. It looks like being what the King has told us to be. It looks like him. Now, we might not be able to cut like Jesus, juke like Jesus, but Jesus says, follow me, the jukes will be there. Because on the night he was betrayed, disciples didn't see that coming, and they didn't see this coming. Jesus took bread and he broke it. And then he says something that they couldn't have imagined. He said, this is my body broken for you. Y'all imagine that. I'm going to be set up on a chair, and there's going to be soldiers, and Peter, James, and John are going to get the plum positions. They're going to drink from the same cup I drank. James first, John last, Peter crucified upside down. They will get the plum positions. Not in the way you think. He said, this is my body, broken for you. What are we supposed to do while we're waiting for the return of the King? Do this. This with bread, but this symbolically for each other's in remembrance of me.